Hey guys, welcome back to Intro to Plants Part 2. So this is where we left off last time. I just want to make sure that you have, and again, I'm going to toggle through my things. So make sure that your notebook is open and that your first 5 questions are filled out from the previous information. All right, so you should have at least up to question number 4, what do gymnosperms produce, filled out. Then we are going to start with question number 5, what do gymnosperms produce? Okay, so I am going to go, make sure you go into your Google Drive and you open up your virtual notebook, or if you have a paper, make sure you have it open to the correct page, and we will start from there. Okay. So I just want to do a quick overview. We talked about the 2 different types of plants found on the planet, which were a gymnosperm and an angiosperm. And then the 2 types of angiosperms we're going to talk about in a little bit. But make sure that you have filled out that family tree portion with the 2 tops of the angiosperm and gymnosperm. Then we talked about what is a vascular plant. Now, this is the most important part. So a vascular plant is qualified as vascular because it has special tissue that has the ability to transport food and water throughout the plant, okay, using those special tissues, which we'll talk about as we go through our lessons, this marking period. And then number 2, what are examples of those kinds of things? So you have trees, vines, shrubs, and flowers. Then what are the 2 types of vascular plants? So we had the angiosperm and the gymnosperm were the 2 types. And then we had talked about their age. So we said the gymnosperm was about 350 million years ago, and the angiosperm is 250 million years ago. So make sure you have all that written in your notes because you will need it. And then question number 4, what do gymnosperms produce? And we had talked about how they produce pine cones or some type of cone, okay? Now we're going to move on to the angiosperms. So the major difference, and I can't stress this enough, is that angiosperms are going to produce flowers. They might produce them once a year. They might produce them once every 10 years. But if they ever produce a flower, they are called an angiosperm. So for question number 5, what do angiosperms produce? They produce flowers. For question number 6, how many known species of each vascular plant are there? We had already filled out the gymnosperm one on that section, which was 1,000 known species. If you look here, the angiosperm has 300,000 known species. That is a very big difference between the 2 of them. So my understanding as a scientist, my thinking, I should say, is that gymnosperms were obviously here way before angiosperms on this planet because they're the oldest. They're 350 million years old, sorry. Gymnosperms angiosperms come around 100,000 years later. They are only 250 million years old. So what that kind of is telling me is that gymnosperms were on their way of dying off. They needed to evolve and they needed to adapt. So they came up with some type of new method so that plants could survive. And that new method was that they started growing flowers so that those flowers could then be pollinated by the insects. They could be reproduced sexually or asexually, and then they would make more plants. And it shows, because there are 300,000 known species found on Earth today of angiosperms, that is working for them. All right. And you can see that they're everywhere. All right, so that is your question and your answer to number 6. There are 300,000 known species of angiosperms, and there are only 100,000, or 1,000, I'm sorry. There are only 1,000 known species of gymnosperms. I'm full of mistakes today, but hey, this is the way life goes, all right? Question number 7, what do both vascular plants have in common? All right, so let's do this real quick. If you go back to your family tree, the 2 types of angiosperms. So flowering plants, there are 2 types. You can have a monocot or you can have a dicot. And there are several ways to look at a plant, a flowering plant, and figure out if it's a monocot or a dicot. But for this purpose, we're going to talk about the flowers itself. So monocots have flower parts in multiples of 3. So if you look at the flower petals, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3. Okay, multiples of 3. So I could look at that and automatically say, oh, that's a monocot plant. So if you look at the dicot, they have multiples of 4 or 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That looks like a nice tropical hibiscus plant. Then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so that's another multiple of 4 or 5. So they would automatically be a dicot plant. Okay, so hopefully you have that family tree completed at this point. So what do both angiosperms and gymnosperms have in common? So this will be your answer to question number 7. So they both use pollen to fertilize. Whether they produce a pine cone or a flower, both of them have pollen within them that need to be fertilized. If the eggs are not fertilized by the pollen, they will not produce more plants. They both contain xylem and phloem. So we had talked about what makes a vascular plant vascular. Is that it has the ability to transport, it has special tissue that has the ability to transport food and water throughout the plant. That's what that xylem and phloem is. And we're going to get more into this in the coming lessons, but xylem is the tissue that transports water. Phloem is the tissue that transports food. And then last but not least, they are both able to be evergreens. Now, gymnosperm is more common, but angiosperms can and will be evergreens as well. All right, so you're finished question number 7. Now we're going to move on to 8. So why are certain plants called an evergreen? So like I said before, they could both be angiosperm or gymnosperm, but they're an evergreen because they stay green year round. It's in the name, forever green, right? So evergreens, and you can look out into the woods, you can look out into your yard, you can see people's landscapings that they have trees that stay green year round, even when it snows or gets really, really cold. So the reason they are able to do this, okay, and this is for question number 9, they're able to stay green year round because they're only shedding a few leaves at a time, and they usually have needle-like leaves. So what that means is the reason they have needle-like leaves is because it provides more insulation for the water layer that's in the leaves. So it's kind of like a big, huge blanket that's wrapped around that water layer that will stop it from freezing. Now, if you look out in the woods, and right now you notice because it is fall, that all the leaves are falling off. Those are not evergreens. They do not stay green year round. They are called deciduous trees. And the reason that they need to lose their leaves is because they're so thin. There's nothing protecting that water layer from freezing in the wintertime. So if it doesn't shed all of its leaves, it will die. The whole entire plant will die because of that. And so therefore they've built and adapted to dropping their leaves in the fall, going into hibernation, meaning they're going to sleep during the winter, and then come the spring when it gets warm out again, and they're able to protect their leaves that way through the warmth, they grow their leaves back, and then they wake up and start producing again. And it's a cycle that constantly goes. So for question number 9, they're able to stay green for 2 things. They only shed a few leaves at a time during the whole year, and they're usually needle-like, so they have that protection. All right, so the next one is a comparison chart. So I do not want you to write word for word what is right here. What I would like you to do is for the actual age on your chart, this one says that the angiosperms are younger, gymnosperms say they are older. So what I need you to do for the angiosperms is you are going to write the actual age. So an angiosperm was 250 million years, so you're going to put 250 MYA. And then for the gymnosperm side, the actual age was 350 MYA. The next one says the number of species. So if you look at this chart, it'll tell you angiosperms are more diverse and gymnosperms are less diverse. Now, the word diverse means different, okay? So when we're talking about diversity, we're talking about the different number of species that are on this planet. So if you remember from back in your notes, angiosperms have 300,000 known species. So on your chart, I want you to write 300,000. For gymnosperms, you are less diverse, so you only have 1,000 known species on this planet that we know of. And like we're always finding new things and discovering new things, so that could change. But generally, we have about 1,000 known species on Earth. Okay, don't worry about this one. Now, leaf type in your next category. The leaves are usually flat, and we had talked about this. So most angiosperms, which are going to produce flowers, are going to have very thin and flat leaves. This is why trees that are outside need to shed their leaves. They're called deciduous. Shed their leaves so that that layer doesn't freeze, the water layer doesn't freeze in the leaves because they're so thin. For a gymnosperm, this is why gymnosperms are often more evergreens than anything, but their leaves usually form scales or needles. So under angiosperm, I would like you to write flat. Under gymnosperm, I would like you to write scales or needles. All right. Don't worry about the habitats. So pollination process. So this is very important. Angiosperms, because they produce flowers, they are often going to be insect pollinated, which anytime have you ever seen in the spring and the summer, bees flying from flower to flower, that's called insect pollinated. Gymnosperms, because they produce pine cones or some type of cone, they are going to need the wind to carry their pollen once it's released to the female part of the tree or the female tree that's carrying the female parts, all right? So for pollination process, you're going to write insect under angiosperm, and under gymnosperm, you're going to write wind. All right, and last but not least, what are they being used for? So angiosperms are typically what we call a softwood. So they are used in medications, food, clothing, etc. When we're talking about gymnosperms, they produce more hardwood than they do anything. So they're going to produce paper and be used for lumber and building your houses and that kind of stuff. So for use, you're going to write medications, food, and clothing under angiosperm. And under gymnosperm, you're going to put paper and lumber.